Welcome to Belonging Reimagined. I'm your host, Dr. Mona. As a mental health therapist, professor, and researcher, I guide folks in owning their belonging journey and exploring barriers to belonging. In this podcast, I explore real stories with phenomenal guests about how to experience both interconnection and interdependence. And my hope for you is that you learn ways to experience more connection in the world around you and the world within yourself. We don't have to do this life thing alone. You're right where you belong. We have a special guest today, Matteo Pistono, who wrote a phenomenal book on how to breathe properly, something that we're all doing. We're all breathing, but we're not all doing it in the way that could benefit us. And so I read this book, y'all. And if you're watching it on YouTube, I'm going to hold a picture of this book up. It is beautiful. I mean, it is absolutely stunning. And it has been such an easy read, by the way, such a great read. It's called Breathe How You Want to Feel. Think about that for a moment. Your breathing toolkit for better health, restorative sleep, and deeper connection. Hello, I want all of those things in my life, as I know that we all do. So Matteo, welcome, welcome, welcome. We met through a mutual friend who has introduced me to a lot of the guests on here, Pip Davidson in the house, by the way, y'all. If you haven't met Pip, go listen to that episode on belonging and gender expansiveness. And Pip has just been fantastic in introducing me to wonderful people like yourself. And when Pip said, hey, you and Matteo have to meet, first of all, your energies would really meld well together. I was like, hell yeah, I trust Pip. Picked up your book and I was like, I could just feel the tone of your energy come through it. And what you're put out there, Matteo, has been incredibly helpful for me just in the last couple of weeks since I've read your book, and have found myself just feeling so much more relaxed, feeling like I have so much more agency over my emotions. And for that, I just want to deeply from the bottom of my heart thank you, because that has been truly a gift. So thank you for being on the show, and thank you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. That means a lot. You know, as a writer, as a teacher of conscious breathing, that's all we want. You know, we just want people to hear our words and hear it and then take it into their experience. And if it's beneficial, great. And if not, you can leave it on the bookshelf. But if it is beneficial, it's all the better. So thank you very much for those kind words.
Yeah. And don't leave it on the bookshelf. Just pass it to somebody else, by the way. Pass it to somebody else. But, you know, I really love how generous you've been with resources in your book, with actually guiding people through different exercises. And it has been phenomenal. And so we would love to learn more about you personally. Your spiritual journey led you over 30 years living in Nepal and Tibet. And I'm just wanting to hear from you what that journey has been like for you so far.
Yeah, well, that's where my sort of journey of learning about the breath, and you use this word agency, which is very important for me, about having agency over not only our life, but especially our internal landscape, right? And it's not to say that we want to always be calm, because I teach meditation, I teach conscious breathing. I'm talking about, and it's just as the title of the book says, breathe how we want to feel. So sometimes we want to upregulate, we want to get our game on, we want to be focused and concentrated and go for it. And there's breathing that we can do before and during to make that happen. Or if we want to down-regulate, move into rest and digest mode, just sort of relax, we can also do that. And things in between. Yeah, like sort of flow states for meditation and prayer. And so I was introduced to how to do this about 30 years ago when I went over to live in Kathmandu. I actually was escaping. I don't think I put this in the book. It was, I had worked on a political campaign and we had lost and were expected to win. And I was like, I'm done with these voters. I was living in the Rocky Mountain. I was living in Wyoming. And so I just sort of bought a one-way ticket to Nepal, and I'd heard about Buddhism a little bit. So when I arrived there, I sort of searched out a teacher, and it was a nun. It was a nun from Sweden, of all things. She'd been living in Nepal for a couple of decades. And she taught me how to breathe, right? She taught me about breath awareness, which is this foundational practice within Buddhism and also within the yogic traditions. she taught me about this real basic notion of breath awareness, becoming aware of how we're breathing in this moment. And when we tap into that, we can see that how we're breathing is reflecting our internal landscape and our emotional landscape, and how that how that landscape external is also affecting our breathing. So there's this two-way street, right? This back and forth that's happening. So she taught me this breath awareness practice, and it was also combined with the practice of impermanence, right? This practice of death awareness. And I write about this a little bit in the third part of the book. I suppose we'll talk about this. But the breath is a sort of embodiment of that, right? Because we breathe, we inhale, it brings life into us, and we exhale, and there's an expiration. We're actually expiring that breath. So we do that 20, 30,000 times a day. And that play of the inhalation, which brings life, and the exhalation, which is the sort of down regulation, if you will, or expiration, was really profound for me at the time, because I was this political activist who was only fire. And I needed that actually to help self-regulate myself. And so I learned about that. And then it was combined with, then I started my whole meditation practice, which is now 30 years on. And it was combined with a yoga practice. And I learned sort of pranayama, this sort of yogic breathing techniques, which are very complicated, which I share a little bit in the book, not the complicated part of it, but essentially how to control the breath, how to manipulate the breath, how to hold the breath, and the effects it has on our psychosomatic feeling, like how we are in the world. So that was how it started back in the day, like 30 years ago in Nepal. And I had so many wonderful Buddhist and yoga teachers back in the day, and continue to have teachers today. And now I'm presenting this in a way that is devoid of jargon. Like, it's wonderful that we have all these Tibetan Buddhist teachers and Hatha yoga teachers, but we don't need Tibetan or Sanskrit terms to breathe how we want to feel.
And it's interesting because just you're talking about it and hearing you inhale and then exhale, expire the breath. I found myself immediately aware of my breath and kind of following suit with that. It's interesting how we do that, because we are social beings. And so we tend to mirror back and forth to one another. So just having people in your life who have that kind of awareness and bring that mindfulness in can do that to you just in a moment. So I really appreciate that. I'm already feeling relaxed and focused right away. So what inspired you then to actually write a book about breathing, Matteo?
So I started teaching meditation about 15 years ago. And I was living on the East Coast, and I was teaching in groups and to individuals. I mean, I've been teaching for quite a few years, and I was teaching the way that I was taught. And the way that I was taught had a lot to do with using the mind to overcome the mind, right? We are distracted, so we use the mind, sort of concentration or focus, to overcome the mind. Or we have emotional risings, and so we use a sort of dialectic. We sort of think about how we might want our emotions. And people were coming to me, and I was sharing these techniques, and I was just noticing that it was a really heavy lift. It's okay. It's possible to use a focused mind to overcome an agitated mind or an anxious filled mind. But if we approach that more somatically based, that is where we use the breath to create the sort of vessel that is our body, where we create a sort of rest and relaxed and spacious place where meditation can arise, it's much more easy to meditate. So I sort of switched over to teaching essentially breathing practices that everybody thought was meditation, because it brought about the same effect. People had this idea of what meditation will bring them, some sort of calmness, focus, concentration, this type of thing. But they weren't arriving there because they were in this, their nervous system was in this anxious filled state, this sympathetically driven state. So what I decided to do was to essentially, they would come and I would down regulate them. And then we would introduce meditation practices, and meditation can arise much quicker, much easier.
Doing the breathing before the meditation as opposed to within the meditation. You can do it within the meditation, because here's what I'm hearing right away. This is where my mind goes. I'm autistic. I don't know if you know this. I'm autistic and also have ADHD. What we have found clinically is that a lot of ADHDers, people with ADHD and autism, or even either or, really struggle with meditation, and it can actually be more activating of our symptoms. And so for me, I don't do traditional meditation, but if I sit and focus on my breathing in itself, then my nervous system can get to a certain place where I'm able to be very fluid in my thinking, because I could get really rigid with the autism sometimes. But when I get myself in a certain physical state, as you're talking about, then all of a sudden I can be more innovative. I can be more creative. I can grade papers faster. I can respond to emails quicker. I can enjoy silence, more richly than before. And so when you're talking about sympathetic, you're not talking about kindness.
Right.
You're talking about the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight, freeze, flop. There are all different kind of ways that the sympathetic nervous system reacts as a way to keep us safe when it's anticipating danger, even if it's falsely anticipating it. And we can get ourselves in that state just from our thoughts alone, with worry and rumination, and which means thinking about the same thing over and over and over again, where you're on what we call the worry channel, that you're trying to turn the channel. And traditional meditation practices, from what you're saying, kind of say, oh, let's look at what your thoughts are. But people get so attached in that space because they think it's keeping them safe. They can't even abandon those thoughts to go to that kind of metaconscious space. But they might be able to remember, like, okay, let me just change my breathing, and then be able to say, okay, let me look at what it is that I'm worried about.
That's exactly it. Because sometimes when we apply a meditation, the idea of a meditation technique, as you just said, that itself can be stress inducing, right? So instead of that, and this is the way that I present right at the very beginning of the book, I talk about, I use this acronym of AIR, AIR. And that is that when we recognize that we're in a stressful situation, if we've been triggered, if the stressors are coming, or even if we're anticipating that they are going to be coming, that is in the realm of that we're aware of these things that are happening, whether they be external or internal. We use our awareness, and it's a particular kind of awareness. It's this interoceptive awareness, this awareness of how we're feeling. And how does that appear? Our heart rate might be going up. We might notice our heart rate is increasing. We might notice sweaty palms, dryness of mouth, ringing of the ears, all of these. And we all have our different way that we express when stressors hit, the way that we react. But it's, as you said, our sympathetic nervous system is turned on. And so when we recognize through our interoceptive awareness that these things are happening, that is this golden moment. Because it doesn't mean that we have to be stressed, because we can guarantee in life that stressors are coming, whether they be external to us or internal to us. That moment is where we have agency, that we can apply the second letter of AIR of this intervention. And how do we intervene? Well, once we know, and it's not complicated, once we have a few breathing tools in our sort of toolkit, we can intervene with those. We can do a breathing intervention. So what is it that I do when I pull on to the interstate and there's a sort of line of traffic? And that's a particular situation where I usually grip the steering wheel. I might grind my teeth. That's one of the things that causes me stress, along with every time I look at the news and we all have our stressors, right?
Yeah.
So just think of your stressors right now, whatever it is, our listeners, whatever your stress, whatever usually stresses you out when your partner does that thing, right? And you're just like, that's the moment that we have a choice, because between the stimulation and our reaction if we can create a little gap. And that's the gap where our agency comes about. And that's where we do something like where we just place our attention on the breath and then just exhale a little bit longer than we inhale. What happens when we exhale, say for a 5 count, and then inhale for a 4 count? That exhalation that's a little bit longer, it turns on the part of our nervous system that says, everything's okay. We're safe right now. That parasympathetic nervous system, right? We might do other sort of, and I present a number of these in the book, of these breathing interventions on down regulating when stressors are there. And so and then what happens is that once we apply that and we feel a certain way, that's the R, the regulation. So we have awareness, intervention, and regulation, right? And this isn't to say that I'm not sort of proposing that all day long. We're just like waiting for the stress to hit, and then we apply breathing. And so it's all day where we're sort of neurotically worried about our breath and the breathing intervention. It's not that. It's that when we need it, we have it we have it sort of at the ready. And this is one of the sort of a motto that I use is like taking part in our own rescue, right? So ask for help when we need it, but know that we have this agency. We all know ourselves. We know we know the things that are coming. And so, I can predict, like if there's certain things that happen in my life that if they happen right now, I can predict my response because I have my trips and my triggers and the things. And so we all kind of know, we know ourselves. We have that self-awareness. The question is, can we apply that breathing intervention so we can change the dynamic? We can change how we react to the stressors.
Yeah. Instead of getting really entitled about that feeling that we get and that behavioral response of like, but I'm right. Because we could get so entitled about it. But is it going to give you the outcome that you want? Like, you know what happens when you respond this way, even if you really do think you're right. And maybe you actually are, if there is a right and wrong and all this, you are always like right in what you're experiencing. We all are. And also, does this reaction get you to where you want to feel, right? Does it get you to where you want to feel? So what I'm hearing from you too, Matteo, is that between that activating sensation and your response, that gap in between, what does that look like if someone is a fly on the wall? What I'm hearing is it looks like a pause.
Mona, it's exactly what I do. My first reaction, my first intervention that I do if the stress comes is I actually don't do anything with the breath first. My first step isn't that. My first step is I put my tongue on the roof of my mouth.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
When you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, you literally touch with your tongue the vagus nerve that starts at the base of the brain. It spreads out over the palate and then moves down throughout the body. The vagus nerve is the principal nerve for the relaxation response. And so I just touch it there. I don't press it up on the top. And some people can suction their tongue to the roof of their mouth. All you need to do is put the tip of your tongue behind your front teeth with your lips slightly closed. This also puts your breathing apparatus in the optimal position for respiration. And then I put my tongue on the roof of my mouth, and then I just find my breath wherever I am in the cycle of inhale or exhale. I find my breath, and I just breathe out the nose, and I just extend my exhale. And that's what you just said. It's a pause. And that pause, there's a number of things that are happening there. Physically, like I just said, you're actually affecting the parasympathetic nervous system to help you relax, right? But psychologically, what you're doing is that you're diverting your attention. Like my attention moves to my tongue and then finds my breath. So I'm skillfully distracting myself from myself.
Yeah. In the therapy world, we call that cognitive refocusing.
Yeah, exactly.
And using anything tactile, anything that you can touch, that you can feel, that you can, anything like that incorporates your senses, but especially the feeling of touch is one of the best and quickest ways, I will say, to refocus your thoughts to something else so that you're not sitting there spiraling in whatever it is that's
Exactly.
activating the traffic or the comment that they made or
Yeah.
whatever it is, or your boss. Yeah.
And that
It
spiral might
turns
still
your focus.
happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we might do that, and then 2 or 3 seconds later, it might come right back, like the spiral. But then we can just we can keep doing it. And I add a third element to this, which is I put my tongue, extend the exhale, and then I already have in my mind a word that I say to myself once on the exhale, once on the inhale. So this is part of the reframing. And it can be a mantra. It could be a positive affirmation. It can be anything that helps us. And I just say, I am joy. So I'm just convincing myself that I'm joy, right? Like I'm in traffic in Southern California and I choose to be joyful, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a particularly joyful situation being in traffic, but we have that agency, right?
Yeah.
And that reframe is an important element in stress management. And these things like this, I call this the mnemonic nasal breathing in the book. The tongue in the roof of the mouth, extend the exhale, apply the mantra or the affirmation. We have to practice it a little bit beforehand. And all of these things, they're just like tools. If you're a carpenter, you don't show up at a job site and start using a tool that you've never used before. Right? You've honed your skill. You're pretty good at it. You might get better as you keep on using it. And this is the same thing, is that we want to have these tools at the ready when the stressors hit. So it takes a little bit of practice or just a little bit of even thinking about it. Like, what am I going to do? And this is I apply this notion of, it's a Stoic notion of, it's called premeditatione malorum. Translate is like meditating on troubles. Like, I know when I go get my car and I go on the interstate that I am going to hit traffic. I should not be surprised. When I click on the news today, I know what I'm going to see. I shouldn't be surprised when I see that next thing that sets me off. This is the way the world works. And some of us are more fortunate where we have less stressors coming at us, and some of us are less fortunate where we have more stressors. But the fact is, we are all going to have stressors, whether they be external or internal, because we all are going to get sick. Sickness is going to come. So we may as well have a plan. That's this meditating on troubles is like, how am I going to be when I was thinking about this last week? I got COVID last week. Right?
Oh,
but I had thought about it beforehand. And I was like, when this happens, what am I going to do? And my initial thought was, I only thought about the other people who had COVID.
Yeah.
Because it sucks, right? You feel terrible and like all of this, but it's a kind of mindset. And I was doing my breathing things, which are also very good I was doing a specific kind of breathing things for COVID because it affects the respiratory system. But again, this is the idea is that we plan ahead. And so a lot of people come to me with questions about, like, what do I do? How do I get better sleep? Or how do I de-stress? Or how do I deal with my anxiety? And I use this idea a lot. Like, let's think about what's likely going to happen. And then what is our response going to be? Because then it takes out that initial, I don't want this to happen to me.
Because how many of us have woken up in the middle of the night and we're having a hard time getting back to sleep, and then we're frustrated because we're not getting back to sleep?
Exactly. And that's the
why
point.
am I not getting back to sleep?
Yeah.
I've got this meeting in the morning. I'm not going to be rested enough. I'm not going to be clear in the brain. Why won't my body go back to sleep? And then we have this disconnect where we don't even feel like we belong back to our bodies again. We are now at odds with one another, and we're not celebrating self really, or even embracing self in many ways. And that's what I'm hearing you talking about. It's like, that can start a whole spiral in itself that leads to a number of different things. And one of the things that you've talked about and you've written about in your book is this shallow breathing that we do, and how most of us are doing shallow breathing. I mean, I realized it. Here I am doing a podcast with you, right? About belonging and breath work and breathing. And I didn't even realize I'm breathing in a shallow way until at the very beginning when you started doing just that one inhale exhale. I was like, oh, wait, yeah, me too. I need to be doing that, So
Yeah.
why is it that, first of all, what is shallow breathing? And follow up to that is, why is it so common? Why are we doing it?
There's many different ways that we have what we might call suboptimal breathing. And that is that we're breathing in a way that isn't conducive to our physical and mental well-being. Okay? And the reason those comes that comes about are the reasons are varied and oftentimes very complex. If we're talking about they're as complex as our emotions, right? Which are very complex. But when we are stressed, if we want to sort of break it down into like these like two different ways, that if we just want to talk about that, if we are in a calm and spacious manner, or if we're in a stressed and anxious manner, and sometimes we don't always know, right? Sometimes we don't know that we're actually in this stress and anxious manner because we're disassociating from it and whatnot. But if the way that we are feeling affects the way that we breathe.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes if we notice that we're breathing, like, so we're on video right now, but we're also doing this as audio. But if we're breathing in a shallow way, what does shallow mean? Mm-hmm. Shallow means that we're taking very small, almost like guppy breaths. And oftentimes this is exhibited if you look at people when they're breathing in a shallow manner, that their mouth is open, they're breathing with their mouth open, and they're using their shoulders and their neck. So their shoulders are sort of moving up and down in a sort of a quick manner. And they're breathing very high. When we say shallow, we mean that the breath isn't moving deeper in the lower part of the lungs. And the consequence of this is that breathing exacerbates our stressful feeling. And our stressed out state makes us shallow breathe.
It's a cycle.
It's a cycle. And it becomes a learned habit of breathing in this way. So then if we can imagine that we're taking 20 to 30,000 breaths a day, and our breathing is actually contributing to our anxiety, to our stress. So when we bring awareness to this, we don't have to necessarily initially think, okay, why am I shallow breathing? Why am I taking the guppy breaths? All we need to do is just switch to the intervention. And in this case, the intervention may be placing your hand on your belly button. Like right now, all of our listeners, you can place your hand on your belly button if you're not driving, right? And as you breathe in, you feel your belly pushing out into your hand. And as you exhale, just push the belly in a little bit to give a little bit of somatic feedback. And then as you inhale through the nose, feel the belly move out. And then exhale smoothly, feel the belly move in. Now, as we just did this, Mona, I was looking at you and I saw that your shoulders didn't move at all. Yeah. When we're breathing throughout the day, there's no real need for our neck and our shoulder muscles, which are secondary breathing muscles, to be engaged. But if we're shallow breathing, they oftentimes will be. And what ends up happening? If we're doing that 20,000 times a day, we get neck pain. We get shoulder pain. Yes. And what is also not happening is our diaphragm isn't engaging very much. So then we have a very loose core and our lower back and our hips start to hurt.
And we have that curvature in the lower back.
Exactly.
And everything starts to get weakened, as you're saying.
I'm gonna throw in a cell phone here where you put the cell phone out a little bit lower, the neck juts out, the mouth usually drops open as we're scrolling.
Oh, true.
There might even be involuntary breath holding, which drops our oxygen levels in the body as we're getting hit with a lot of dopamine each time we scroll. I mean, it becomes to be, as I said, complex, right? These things. So getting back to like the main point here, because sometimes we can be like, they're very complex, but sometimes how can we just do the breathing intervention? Here, we want to belly breathe. And belly breathing means just to breathe as low as we can. And the easiest way to arrive at belly breathing is to breathe through the nose. If there's one thing that we take away from this podcast today with regards to how to breathe, is breathe through your nose all the time. Unless you're exercising hard, eating, or speaking, keep it nasal, right? You should eat through your nose as frequently as you breathe through your mouth, which is to say, we shouldn't be breathing through the mouth very much.
But that took me a second, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I try to do that.
I was like, eat through our nose. No,
Exactly.
wait a second.
Yeah, that's not going to
Don't do
happen.
that.
So we don't need to be breathing through the mouth.
Okay. So, it makes me think immediately about brain fog too, because we just have so
Yeah.
much brain fog, but we'll revisit that in a minute because stick around, folks, because we're going to do a breathing exercise in a little bit for that. So how can breath work really help us deepen our connection with other people and even within ourselves, Matteo? I mean, I think it's kind of self-evident with the relationship with ourselves, right? From what you were talking about. How does it help us really deepen our connection with other people as well?
When we're with other people, especially if we're communicating or if we're just interacting with other people, if our system is in an elevated state,
Yeah.
we all know this. Like our partner comes home and they're stressed out, and they don't have to say anything, and you sort of just feel it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I try to do this to my wife. If she comes in, she's elevated, I try to down-regulate the situation vis-a my breath.
Yeah, it's like what we were talking about earlier with the mirroring. That
The mirror
when you started
neurons,
breathing
yeah.
like that, I just found myself. I couldn't even help myself. It was just like
Yeah.
immediately my body started doing that. That might be part of the social creature aspect of it too.
How about when we hug people? Sometimes we hug
Yes.
people and then we hug them and then we're gone. But how about when we
Yes.
hug and the other person goes, just takes a nice long breath, and you feel as though
Yes.
your entire system is massaged.
We always say, you give the best hugs,
Yeah.
but we think it's because they're squeezing us tight. It's probably because they're squeezing us longer and we are feeling that deep, slow breath from them. That is so
Yeah.
true.
So how about if when we arrive into a situation, even if if there's a stressful situation, how about especially if we're with our partner or the friend, or even not with a friend, and things are getting elevated. We start talking about taxes or finances or whatever, the kids or whatever the case may be. If things start to get ramped up, what if in that moment that we take responsibility for the situation and we put our tongue on the roof of the mouth and we breathe slowly out the nose and we allow a gap, a space, a pause to open up within the communication. This gives me the opportunity to actually hear what is being said rather than thinking about what they're saying. Because oftentimes when we're in communication, people are talking and you're actually thinking about your response and you're not hearing what they're saying. Breathing can allow us to actually hear what is being said. Right? And then when we're speaking, as I'm trying to do a little bit today, I'm trying to demonstrate this, Mona, is in between sentences, we take a nasal breath and it slows everything down. Rather than something like this. If I start talking like this, like I usually am when I'm really excited, and I start talking like this and I'm hyperventilating and I'm taking these breaths, it's a complete, that last 20 seconds was totally different than the previous 2 minutes.
And my chest started feeling tight when you were talking like that. Like I immediately had just an instinctual reaction like, okay, something feels heightened here. So my body was getting activated from that. And it makes me think too of parenting, right? I'm a mom.
Okay.
And I have been two different moms. Okay. I'm clearly one person, but I have presented as two different moms to my two now big kids. Right? They're bigger than me by a long shot now. And I was, as a first time mom, super anxious. And on top of it, having a baby that just didn't feel well, physically, reflux and all kinds of things. And I just felt inadequate. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I went in with that mindset to begin with. I was like, I've never changed a diaper. I mean, I didn't know anything. Right. And except that I really loved this baby. And it didn't matter because, in some ways, because I was such an anxious mom. And and by the way, back then they didn't have conscious parenting and gentle parenting and all that stuff. We were Gen Xers that were just winging it like the rest of civilization before us. And, and I think I probably stayed in that anxious state all the time, honestly. And then I had like hormonal stuff and depression and all kinds of things, but holding my baby, it was almost like sometimes I felt like I was making it worse on my child, probably now as you're explaining it, because she could feel my breathing. And I'm just like, this shallow breathing, like anxious I'm not necessarily making that sound, but I was screaming on the inside and terrified. And I'm sure, like we hear about animals in nature too. We're animals, by the way, about they can sense that from us. And that's what it's making me think of. Yet somehow or another, the second time around, I was a completely different person, super calm, but it was a decision that I made. And looking back, I remember I made a conscious decision that I was going to take care of myself and stay very, very calm. And it was more for my own mental health, not realizing at the time, which sounds absurd now, 17, 18 years later, that I was going to be a very calm person for my own mental health because I was scared of myself. And the first time around, I was not in a good mental space at all. I was very scared for my own life, honestly, at that time. And so I wanted to make sure that I kept myself tethered here. And I really think that breath work that I was doing kind of instinctually because I decided I'm going to stay calm and I was breathing in a way to keep me that way without knowing all of these things yet, verbally, just instinctually. That kid turned out to be super, super calm, by the way, and was able to attach more easily to me. Of course, a baby who's feeling an anxious mom is going to struggle with attachment. At least in my case, I know it's different for each person, but that was my own experience. This is not prescriptive by any means for folks. I'm not here as your therapist in this podcast. But yeah, it really did play out for me that way. And I think a lot of moms can really relate to that. But, the first time around, it was like, I felt like it was going to be just luck of the draw, that the baby was going to determine how I showed up. And I let that happen. And then it became that cycle, just like what you're talking about. I think that's an example that's super relatable to a lot of us. And then we feel this, especially as mothers, we feel this mom shame, like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. I'm worn out and I don't feel great. And my body is dysregulated. Like you were saying, I'm emotionally dysregulated. What's wrong with me? And so, as we're talking about how it can really impact our relationships with other people, I mean, it can be from the get-go with the littlest of ones. And we don't have to be, completely at the mercy of this baby's mood. We can kind of set that tone, like what you're saying you do, like with your wife, for example, set the tone in the room. And I know it takes discipline.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think this as an example, but I recognize also that you're just trying your best.
We're all just trying. We're just trying,
right?
Maya Angelou, who's right here from North Carolina, we claim her. That's where we're living. That's where I am. She says, when you know better, do better. And that's really where you've come in, Matteo, and we really appreciate it. And, when you're talking about we're all just trying and North Carolina, it makes me think of, we live in a part of the country where environmental allergens are really, really high. And, along those lines, breath work can be very challenging for some of us. I developed asthma over the years here. And so I'm wondering, are there any alternative techniques for someone who has respiratory issues or for people who don't necessarily have access to high air quality. What are some alternative techniques that we could do that can help us kind of fully participate in this breath work?
So there's sort of two things that I'll say about it. And the first is that about the importance of nasal breathing, which I want to talk about. And the second is that however we can, throughout our life, and this is sort of on a daily basis, use our lungs to our full capacity. That is to not lose lung capacity as we get older, because this is what happens when we get older. We lose lung capacity. And our lung capacity has a direct correlation to our lifespan. So I want to talk about that. So the first thing is when it comes to dealing with poor air quality, or even just in general, just breathing, as I said earlier, to keep it nasal, the reason that we want to be breathing through the nose almost all the time, unless you're like carrying super heavy groceries upstairs, or maybe your nose gets stuffed up because of allergies or because of a cold or something, that aside. But even if you have a deviated septum, for example, we want to use nasal breathing as much as possible. And the reason is, if we think about breathing, right, we're just taking air, we're taking this air in that's outside of us into our body. It's actually miraculous. When we think about that, there's about 21% oxygen in the air, and there's other gases. That air comes into our body somehow, right? And that somehow is because our diaphragm, which is like runs along the rib cage, it sort of cuts us, our diaphragm is in our mid torso. It's like a suction, and it suctions. When we breathe in, that suction, it pulls air from the outside into our lungs. The route that air comes into our lungs is very important. We might not have ever thought about it. If you breathe in through the mouth or through the nose, it's all the same. It just comes into the lungs. It's very important, or there's a lot of difference, if you will, between how that air arrives in the lungs. Because our lungs by themselves have a very low defense system against allergens, against pathogens, against bacteria. So if we breathe through the nose, it provides the greatest defense as opposed to the mouth. And why is that? Well, when we breathe through the nose, as it moves, it's not like a straight shot when it comes into the nostrils and then goes down the throat and into the lungs or the esophagus. It goes through a whole maze like hallways, if you will, throughout the paranasal passageway that goes in, that are sort of below your eyes and above your eyes. And this maze, it looks like a conch shell. If you were to cut one in half, it has all these, and when the air moves through there, that air, that our paranasal passageway is lined with little tiny hair, and that's called cilia. And inside, at the base of the hair, is a sort of a coating of mucus, a very beneficial mucus. So when the air passes over there, it sort of, it's like an air conditioning system. It warms the air, especially if it's cold outside. It purifies the air of actual substances that we are breathing in. And it humidifies the air, which is very important, perhaps not always in North Carolina, but in dry areas, this humidification. So it does these, it cleans it, it purifies it, and it warms it before it arrives in the lungs. The other thing that mucus that is in there, it's antibacterial and antimicrobial. So when it carries that antibacterial mucus substance in a very, very light way into the lungs. And this is very, very important because I said our lungs have this low defense system. If we breathe in through the mouth, we have none of that benefits.
Wow.
It just moves in through the mouth, over the tonsils, and goes right down into our lungs. And so we are essentially cleaning the air when we breathe through the nose.
Wow.
The less we use the nose, if we use it or lose it, right? The capacity to breathe, to have the benefits through the nose. Because some people are like, that come to me, they're like, I can't breathe through my nose. It's sort of closed up all the time, or I just don't even know how to. So their mouth is always open. And they're just sort of just taking these, like, usually small breaths, or and I talk about this a fair bit in the book, there's something called over breathing, where you breathe too much air. And so there's all kinds of benefit to nasal breathing, and those are just some of them that I talked about when we talk about air that isn't of the highest quality, right?
Yeah.
Now, the second thing is that when we breathe through the nose, there's smaller holes in our head than the mouth.
Yeah.
So it takes a little bit more force to pull the air in. And that force is created by our diaphragm and by the muscles that are in between the rib cage, our sort of rib basket. In between there, those muscles are called the intercostals. The work between our intercostals and our diaphragm, they have to work a little bit more to bring the air in. And when they work, that expands the space that our lungs can expand out into on the inhale, and then it retracts back into. And this process of breathing through the nose conditions us. It makes us stronger. The whole breathing apparatus makes it stronger. And this strength increases our lung capacity. And this lung capacity is very, very important, right? It creates not just for like endurance athletes or for cyclists or runners. That has its place. We can talk about that as well. But we're talking about just normal living, having the full capacity of our lungs is very important.
If you're struggling then in some way, whether it's asthma or air quality, learning to breathe through your nose, what you're saying, is really important so that you can take advantage of that built-in filtration system that we have that has so many benefits that will actually hopefully improve lung function in some way.
It absolutely will. Yeah. The knock-on effect of when we breathe through our nose throughout the day is it begins to create that habit, or we rehabituate ourselves. Because if you remember your babies, when you looked at them, they're breathing, they weren't breathing through their mouths. They were breathing through their nose, and they had this beautiful, like wave-like action of their belly was coming up and down. It's just beautiful how little babies breathe. We want to return to this wave-like action where when we breathe in, the first thing that moves is around our belly button, and we expand outwardly rather than vertically.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when we think about breathing, if you say to your friends, hey, just chill out, just take a deep breath. Most of the time people go.
And raise their shoulders up.
They raise their shoulders. They sniff in so hard that their nostrils collapse. And they take this very sharp breath as if a cougar or a grizzly bear just like busted down the door. Like,
right. That goes against what you're trying to accomplish there. Yeah.
If we want to take a deep breath that is relaxing, we breathe in very slowly through the nose and fill up horizontally.
Yeah.
Because our diaphragm extends all the way around us. And so if you, like right now, if you put your hands, like if you create claws with your hands like this, and you were to put them on your ribs, and then you just breathe through the nose, most of us will feel, put your hands like that and just breathe in. Most of us will feel our first two fingers move because the belly moves low. But on the next breath, try to feel your thumbs.
Yeah. It makes me think too of when you hear people talk about being with someone as they take their last breath, someone who's sick and taking their last breath. It's never, it's not like that. It's a slower kind of breath. And then it's like this, like you said, it expires.
Yeah.
And along those lines, you talk about grief at the end of your book. And how connecting with your breath really can impact the way you make peace with mortality. And I'd love to hear more from you about that, Matteo.
I mean, I guess we should say we'll talk a little bit about death and dying. So for individuals that might have some sort of death anxiety, just know that we're gonna talk about that right now. As I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, when I was in Nepal, my first teacher, she gave me sort of two things to do. One was to sit there just on my cushion and watch the breath come in and watch the breath go out. That was it. And that was what I did for about 6 months, 3 times a day for about an hour each time. I just practiced breath awareness. And the second thing she told me to do, because when I moved to Nepal, I lived in this, with a family, and the family lived near this sacred river called the Bagmati, and the Bagmati flows into the Ganges. And it's the river where people were brought after when they died. People would bring the bodies down there, the corpses down there, to be cremated. And it was a sort of open cremation. They would put wood on a pier, or like on a pile of wood, and they put the body there. They would do some rituals around it, and then they would set it alight. And so my teacher suggested I go down and sit on the riverside and just observe this, just as a sort of contemplation. And she didn't really give me any more instruction than that. So my 2 practices I just did all day pretty much was I was breathing, practice conscious breathing, breath awareness. And then I would go down there for a couple hours and watch cremations. And during that time, I remember having like this very strong, after a couple months of this, I just had this strong feeling of like this person that had just passed away, who had just died, that whatever they were doing, like leading up to there, I just had this thought, did they know that was the last time they were going to do it? Like the 2 days before that or something, when they had a cup of tea, did they think, this is the last cup of chai I'm ever going to have? Or when they looked in the eyes of their son or their daughter or their wife or husband or whoever, would they thought this might be the last time I ever see them? And so I took that away, and I still feel that way like today. Like, when I have I love my cappuccinos in the morning. And I always say to this could be my last cappuccino. So the consequence of that isn't morbid, isn't depressing for me. It's like I jump totally in to that cappuccino. So, and that's what it does for me, is this breath awareness, this inhalation, right? Or even if we use the Latin, the inspiration, we're inspiring. Mm-hmm. And then we're expiring. And it seems to me as that last moment on our last breath, when it doesn't, because there's no guarantee that when we exhale, our next exhalation, there isn't any guarantee that we're going to inhale. We think there is, right?
We take it for granted.
Yeah, we take it for granted. So what happens is that for me, it makes me just absorb life so much more, because it may be the last time I do everything. And it's not like it's a constant refrain in my mind and it becomes heavy, quite the contrary. And so this is what this contemplation does. And so that was why I brought it into the last part of the book. So we have breathe how we want to feel and breathe how we want to live, and how to sort of like extract the most out of life and regulate our nervous system. But the fact is, the only thing that's guaranteed in life is that we're going to pass away. That's the only thing that's guaranteed. And there's only one thing that's guaranteed about that, is we don't know when. And that when is what creates sometimes a bit of anxiety. And it's called death anxiety. And it's a totally legitimate, like it's a very real kind of emotion. And so I try to take that, and this third part of the book, I talk about that and how to use the breath in a way to contemplate, in a way to, I don't know if we say come to peace with it, but a way to approach it. Because, and then I actually have 2 practices that I was taught back in the day, and that I still practice today. That one is this sort of like contemplations about mortality. And the second is an actual rehearsal of the breath leaving us and not coming back. And that portal, it's such a unique occurrence, right? Yeah. In this life, it's only going to happen one time. So I want to be lucidly aware at that time.
Well, it goes back to that preparation that you were talking about earlier, and preparing for certain events that we know are inevitably going to happen at some point.
Yeah.
And even our very own deaths.
Yeah. And there's a lot of letting go that happens in this.
Yeah.
Right. If we're holding on, and for those of us like we've been around when people, when they pass away, there's a difference between the people that are really holding on to whatever it be, whether it be their property or their family or life itself or their identity, or those individuals who are super spacious and have let go, but are still very aware, appreciating whatever is still arising. There's a different quality of what's happening there. So in my own practice, this letting go practice today, while I'm like, I feel very alive, I feel super healthy, but I still am practicing letting go each day. And of course, it's a practice. My wife will tell you that I'm not very good at it sometimes.
Welcome to all of us, right?
Exactly.
But hey, one day at a time, like we're doing what we can. Like we were talking about parenting earlier. And so, I had mentioned earlier brain fog. Yeah, I mentioned brain fog. And that part of that is like we're out here doing the most, like speaking of doing what we can. And we're still here, right? We're not at that final breath yet.
Right.
So I would love if you would honor us with just a few moments, just a few breaths. Doesn't have to be a full thing, just a few breaths of like, for those of us who, which is probably most of us, who are experiencing some kind of brain fog, or we're getting ready to go to a meeting, or we just want to have some clarity and just cleanse our system right now. Would you be willing, Matteo, to honor us with just a very brief breathing exercise for like a minute or so? Okay.
Sure.
I'd love it.
Let's think about this for our everyone who's listening now. Think about like today, like maybe it is happening right now, or maybe it's going to happen. Just think about those times when you have this lethargy. There's a sinking, and so we're going to do something right now. And the next time you have that, then try this on, see if it works, play with it. And then if it works, it's awesome. It's yours. It's in your breathing toolkit, right? So what we're going to do is it's something called a physiological sigh, right? And so I'm going to tell you what it is, and then we'll do it together. We're going to inhale fully. So we're going to inhale through the nose. We're going to take a full inhale. We're going to pause for a moment, and then we're going to sniff in to top it off. So there's a 2-part inhale, brief hold, and then you just sigh out the exhale. And you can do it through the nose or through the mouth. I know I said nasal breathing earlier, but I talk about in the book the two differences. But however it feels good to you, most people like out the mouth, so that's fine. So it's a 2-part inhale, pause, and then exhale. And you notice how you feel. And we're going to do that 3 times. Okay? So let's just, for a moment, just take an inventory. You can even close your eyes if you like. How do you feel right now? We're not asking you to feel a particular way. Just notice how you feel. And then just exhale together. Exhale. And then inhale through the nose, low and long, all the way to the top. Hold. And then sniff in a bit more to top it off. Release. Ah. Let the breath land. No hurry. We're going to do that 2 more times. Inhale fully, all the way up. Expand your lungs full. Hold. Sniff in a bit more. Smile to relax your face. Ah. Exhale. We're going to do that 1 more time. A really big inhale. Fill up your lungs. Inhale. Top it off. Exhale. Let the breath land. Brain fog be gone.
brain fog be gone. I feel like I'm floating
Yeah.
and grounded all at the same time. It's like my body and my spirit and energy feels stretched vertically.
Yeah.
And then it makes me feel like I can kind of expand horizontally, like energetically or with my language or with my movement, or I can just sit in this container. I love this.
It's just a 3 breath intervention. 3 breaths.
You're going to be breathing anyway.
Exactly. 3 out of 30,000 today. May as well make them, consciously.
And that's what we can do during that pause, that gap that we were talking about earlier. So
Exactly.
from this beautiful centered space, I invite you to tell us, Matteo, what does belonging mean to you?
Belonging means connecting from this spaciousness that's within me, that's always there, that isn't clouded or cluttered. That spaciousness connects to my wife, to my puppy dog, to my family, to my friends, to my community, and to everyone that I can imagine within my mind's eye. Connecting to them, because Mona, you're in North Carolina, but at some point, my exhale right now is going to be your inhale. We inhale at what point? Even those people that we disagree with, that I walked by today, I know I disagree with them politically. At what point, when they exhaled and then I inhaled, where's the separation? Right? We are all in the same boat together, and I know that we disagree on a lot of things. But this non-separation of breath, that it calms me down when I get fired up at other people. So this belonging, I connect it with the breath.
That is so poignant right now, as we're in 2024, when this is being recorded in a pretty heated election year.
Exactly.
And what I heard from that is, I heard belonging is breath in many ways, and that breath is part of what connects us to one another. And so having that clarity and that cleanliness energetically in the exhale, in the energy with which you are emitting into the world, really can help uplift all of us in many ways, because we're all breathing each other's air. And what kind of air, what kind of energy, what kind of breath do you want to be putting out in the world that's going to be circulating all the way around? Oh, it's beautiful. Matteo, thank you so much. We are so honored to have you here today for this episode.
I'm honored that you asked. And I really appreciate what you're doing, and for your community, especially your local community there in North Carolina.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you and all that you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. All of the show notes and links can be found on my website at drmonanour.com. That's drmonanour.com. Throughout most episodes, you'll hear me referring to the belonging model that I developed, which is represented by a belonging life map that helps you explore areas in your life where you feel more connection and areas where you might feel more isolation. And you can get a free copy of your own belonging life map on my website. Again, that's drmonanour.com. If you like the Belonging Reimagined podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review. That can help more folks find us and keep more episodes coming. Until next time, I'm Dr. Mona. You're right where you belong.